Maybe you came here because the silence of your room is not quite enough to quiet the noise of your mind. Right now, your thoughts may be walking through tomorrow, rehearsing conversations you wish had gone differently, or listing the tasks you didn't quite manage to finish before the sun went down. It is a heavy, brittle feeling, isn't it? As if you are holding your breath, waiting for the day to finally be over, yet afraid that if you truly let go, you might lose the thin, precarious grip you have on your own peace. You are not alone in this. The room is dim, the moonlight is tracing soft, pale lines across your floorboards, and the night air is cool, carrying the faint, distant scent of the world settling into sleep. Your blanket is warm, your pillow is soft, and for the next little while, there is nothing else you need to be. You are not broken, dear friend. What you are feeling is not a sign that you have failed or that you have lost your way. It is simply the exhaustion of trying to be strong in a way that leaves no room for your own humanity. Maybe you have tried to be so careful, so disciplined, so guarded, that even your moments of rest feel like a performance you are doing for an audience that isn't even watching. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent. We will not try to defeat your thoughts or demand that you find immediate healing. Instead, we will look at this brittle, guarded way of moving through the world, and we will gently invite it to thaw. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to let the armor fall, even just for this hour. Nothing is required of you right now, and you certainly do not have to solve your whole life before the morning comes. There is a strange, quiet paradox in the way we suffer. We often believe that if we can just stay hard, stay focused, and stay tightly wound, we will be protected from the unpredictable nature of our own lives. We act as though being soft is synonymous with being fragile. But if you look at the world around you, you will see that the most enduring things, the deep carved canyons, the smooth, polished river stones, the ancient swaying trees, are not the ones that fought against the current with rigid, unyielding force. They are the ones that learned to yield. The Buddhist insight we are exploring tonight is this: the mind does not become peaceful because you defeat your struggles. It becomes peaceful when you stop treating your own vulnerability as an enemy to be conquered. Your softness is not a liability, it is your greatest resilience. Right now, if it feels right, take a slow breath. Let the air fill your chest, and as you exhale, imagine you are slowly letting your shoulders drop, releasing that familiar, tight hold you keep on your own boundaries. You don't have to do this perfectly. Even noticing the tightness is enough. You are here to rest, and your nervous system, which has been working so hard to keep you safe, finally understands that it can stand down. You have spent so much time being the rock, resisting the water, fearing that if you yield, you will be eroded. But tonight, we will consider the possibility that it is the water, the soft, yielding, persistent current of awareness that holds the true, quiet power to shape a life. You might notice a thought drift through, perhaps an old self-judgment about why you aren't calmer or better at letting go. Just notice it. See it for what it is, a thought, not a command. You do not need to obey it. You do not need to argue with it. You can just let it exist, like a leaf floating on the surface of a deep, still pool. You are the pool, not the leaf. When you anchor yourself in this sense of being the container, rather than the content of your worries, the internal pressure begins to change. You stop being the one who must constantly reinforce the walls, and you become the one who is witnessing the space they occupy. This is a journey we are taking together, slowly, rhythmically, with no destination other than this very breath. You have traveled a long way to find a moment of real, unburdened safety, and you are finally here. The world outside will hold its own rhythm tonight. The trees, the stars, the cool night air, they don't require your management. They don't ask you to be anything other than a person who is tired and ready to be held by the darkness. You have done enough for today. The mistakes, the missed opportunities, the worries about what others think, These are all stories that the mind likes to tell, but they are not the truth of who you are. The truth is found in this moment, in the quiet, steady beat of your own heart, and the simple, honest relief of finally letting the weight of the day settle into the earth. There is a story I want to share with you, about a temple guardian who prided himself on his unwavering, ironclad discipline. He was a man who lived by the rule that to be soft was to be useless, and he spent his entire life reinforcing the walls of his own heart, believing that this was the only way to protect the peace of the temple. But, as we will soon see, he was so busy protecting the peace that he had entirely forgotten how to live in it. We will explore his journey, and in doing so, we might find a way to gently unlock the places where we have become brittle, allowing the warmth of the present to finally find its way in. But for now, just rest. Let the night wrap around you like a heavy, comforting cloak and allow yourself to drift. You are safe, you are held, and you are ready to begin in a high, windswept valley where the jagged peaks of the mountains seem to tear the very fabric of the sky. There lived a guardian of a long-abandoned mountain temple. His name was Hideo, and for 20 years he had lived by a single, self-imposed rule. Nothing, not a stray stone, not a dead leaf, not even a wandering animal was allowed to disrupt the perfect sterile order he had cultivated in the temple courtyard. He took great pride in his discipline. He was the rock upon which the chaos of the mountain broke. If a storm sent rocks tumbling down the slope and into his carefully raked path, he would spend hours, even days, hauling them back to the edge with a grim, iron-willed determination. His hands were calloused, his back was permanently hunched from the labor, and his heart had become as cold and hard as the shale he spent his life rearranging. He was a man who believed that his constant, frantic struggle against the mountain was the only thing preserving the sanctity of his life. He was terrified of what might happen if he let the temple fall into disrepair, believing that his worth was measured entirely by his ability to hold back the natural decay of the world. He was brittle, like a piece of glass held under too much pressure, constantly fearing the one gust of wind or the one falling pebble that would finally cause him to shatter. He did not sleep deeply, for he was always listening for the sound of shifting gravel, always ready to leap up and defend his ground. One afternoon, in the late autumn, a massive rockslide triggered by the melting snows far above buried the entire northern approach to his courtyard. It was not just a few loose stones, it was a wall of earth, broken slate, and ancient gnarled roots that blocked the path he had spent years perfecting. Hideo stared at the debris, his chest heaving, his face drained of color. He gripped his heavy wooden rake until his knuckles turned white. He did not cry out, he did not ask for help. He simply began to work. He moved with a feverish, desperate intensity, trying to pry the largest boulders from the mound, his breath coming in ragged, short bursts that echoed against the silent mountain wall. He worked for 2 days, his muscles screaming, his vision blurring from exhaustion. He was trying to shove a particularly massive, jagged boulder back up the slope, his boots sliding in the loose dirt, when a young monk, a traveler who had been seeking shelter from the approaching winter, stepped into the courtyard. The young monk was holding a simple, empty wooden bowl, his robes dusted with the pale grey of the mountain path. He stopped and watched Hideo. For a long time, the silence of the temple courtyard, punctuated only by the heavy rhythmic grunts of the guardian's labor. Hideo did not look at him. He was focused on the boulder, his entire world compressed into the agonizing strain of his own muscles. Finally, the young monk stepped forward, not to help move the rock, but to place his wooden bowl on a flat, stable stone right in the middle of the path of a small, trickling stream of meltwater that was running off the mountainside. The water, diverted from its natural course by the rockslide, was carving a narrow, muddy trench through Hideo's perfectly raked sand. Hideo looked up, his eyes wild with frustration. "You are obstructing the path," he barked. his voice raspy from disuse. "Move that bowl. I have work to do." The monk smiled, a gentle, quiet expression that seemed entirely out of place in the midst of Hideo's catastrophe. He did not move the bowl. Instead, he pointed to the trickle of water. "The mountain has decided on a new path for this water," he said, his tone as calm as the mountain air. "I am simply curious to see where it wants to go." Hideo stared at him, bewildered. "That path is not the path," he said. "The path is here. It has been here for 20 years. I must clear the quay so that the temple remains as it was meant to be." The monk took the bowl from the stone, now filled with a small amount of clear mountain water, and walked over to where Hideo was struggling with the boulder. He knelt down, setting the bowl on the ground, and watched the water inside it, which was perfectly still, reflecting the grey, overcast sky. "Your discipline is impressive, Guardian," he said. "But tell me, when was the last time you let the mountain lead the way, rather than forcing the mountain to follow your rake?" Hideo looked at his hands, which were bleeding from the sharp edges of the shale. He looked at the mountain of debris that was far greater than his own strength. He felt the sudden, terrifying realization that he could work until his bones snapped, and the mountain would still be the mountain. The rocks would still fall. The earth would still shift. He had been so busy defending his version of the truth that he had completely forgotten that the world was allowed to change without his permission. The monk reached out and gently took the wooden rake from Hideo's hands. He set it aside, resting it against the temple wall. "The rake, a tool for tending, not for fighting," he said. "Look at the water. It does not hit the rock with the intent to crush it, it simply moves around it. Finding the lowest point, finding the ease, it reaches the valley by yielding, not by pushing." Hideo watched the monk. He looked at the water trickling through the rock slide, not trying to force its way through the debris, but instead creating a new winding path that was actually quite beautiful, a small silver thread woven into the rugged brown of the earth. For the first time in 20 years, Hideo stopped reaching for the stone. He stopped bracing his back. He stopped holding his breath. He looked at the rubble, and instead of seeing an enemy that had defeated him, he saw a landscape that was merely reforming itself. He knelt in the dirt, the cold seeping through his robes, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt an intense, sharp ache of recognition. He realized that for 2 decades, he had been fighting the river of his own life, constantly trying to rake away the inevitable changes, the losses, and the shifts, because he was terrified that if he stopped, he would lose himself. But in the quiet of that moment, with the monk standing beside him, he saw that he had already lost himself. He had become the stone, stiff, unyielding, and destined to be cracked by the weather. He didn't need to be a guardian. He didn't need to be a rock. He took a breath, the first deep, full breath he had taken in years, and felt the tightness in his chest, the brittle, armor-like grip of his own self-importance begin to loosen. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow, and he didn't know if he would ever finish clearing the debris, but for the first time, he didn't need to know. He was simply a man sitting in the dust, watching the water find its way home. And in that small shift, the temple, which had felt like a fortress, suddenly felt like a place where he could finally sit. The monk sat beside him, the bowl between them, both of them watching the light fade behind the peaks. Hideo did not apologize for his arrogance, and the monk did not ask for one. They simply sat, the silence of the mountain finally entering Hideo's heart, not as a command but as a long overdue invitation to rest. "The struggle you have been carrying is much like Hideo's rake. You have been using it to try to manage a life that is much larger, much more unpredictable, and much more fluid than you have been willing to admit. You are not a guardian who must stop the world from changing. You are the one who is witnessing the change. And in the moments ahead, we will look at how this habit, this need to be the unyielding rock in the middle of a rushing river, is precisely what creates the brittleness that keeps you awake at night. But for now, Simply notice your own breath. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to fix the rock slide. You are safe enough to stop raking just for a little while and see what path the water is trying to carve for you. This story is not suggesting that the work of your life, the commitments you have made, the roles you play, the care you pour into your world is meaningless. It is not asking you to become distant, to grow cold, or to stop feeling the profound weight of your own existence. If you have been moving through your life with a sense of frantic protection, convinced that if you were to loosen your grip on your own defenses, if you were to stop being the unyielding rock, if you were to stop bracing against the flow, everything would be lost. This story is not asking you to abandon your safety. It is showing us something far more radical and much kinder. It is showing us that the exhaustion you feel is not caused by the river, but by the desperate energy you expend trying to remain rigid when the current of life is already moving you. When Hideo was in that temple courtyard, he was not just a man caught in a rock slide. He was a man performing a version of himself. He was trying to enforce a sense of order and unchangeability on a mountain that was, by its very nature, subject to shifting earth and flowing water. We often do the same thing in our own lives. We have our own versions of that iron-willed discipline. Perhaps yours is the constant mental rehearsal of a conversation you cannot change, positioning your thoughts so you appear justified in your frustration. Perhaps it is the internal list of every way you are falling behind, which you carry like a heavy, protective shield to ensure you are never caught off guard. We keep these defenses because we believe they are the only things standing between us and the raw reality of our own vulnerability. We believe that if we stop clutching at the rake, if we stop pushing against the boulders of our circumstances, we are failing our duty to survive. But the wisdom of the monk suggests something very different. It teaches us that the first pain, the rock slide, the unexpected change, the moment where the world was harsh and unfair, is a natural part of being alive. It is the inevitable movement of the seasons of our human experience. We cannot always control the first pain. We cannot always stop the mountain from shifting, and we cannot always stop life from presenting us with obstacles we did not ask for. But the second pain, the one that really wears us down, the one that makes the present moment feel like a cage, is the one we add ourselves. It is the judgment we layer on top of our experience. It is the story we tell ourselves that says, "I must stay hard to be safe," or "I am defined by the debris in my path, and therefore I must spend my life trying to move it." That second wound, the one born of our resistance to the flow of life, is the one that bleeds and drains us. Think of how often you have felt that internal friction. You feel vulnerable, and immediately you harden your heart so that you won't be perceived as weak. You feel uncertain, and immediately you obsess over the details, trying to force an outcome that isn't ready to bloom. You want to be at peace, but you are so busy measuring your strength against the unpredictability of your days that you never actually allow yourself to experience the ease of the current. This is the act of being the rock instead of the river. By trying to force your life into a state of perpetual, unyielding control, you are missing the beauty of the rhythm that would allow you to finally move forward. You are exhausted because you are fighting your own nature, and your nature is a much larger force than your own need for perfection. This is not a call to surrender your life to chaos. It is an invitation to meet your life with a different kind of awareness. In the ancient teachings, this is often described as accepting the truth of the present, but you can think of it as the way of the water that realizes it does not need to crash through the stone to reach the valley. It only needs to find the path that is already there. When the monk spoke to Hideo, he wasn't telling him to leave the temple in ruin. He was showing him that the struggle was no longer a solution, it was an obstacle. When you stop treating your own inner defenses, the times when you feel braced, defensive, or entirely overwhelmed by the need to manage everything as if they were the only things keeping you safe, you finally give yourself room to breathe. You do not need to solve your whole life tonight. You do not need to understand why the pattern of your stress feels so familiar, or why the season of your life feels like it is stuck in a landslide. You only need to notice that you are fighting the flow. If you can simply notice the tightness in your chest, or the habit of your mind to lean back into the arguments of yesterday, you have already started to set down the rake. You don't have to throw your tools away in a grand, dramatic gesture. You can just let them rest. You can see them for what they are: tools you once thought you needed to stay alive, but which are now only serving to keep you brittle. There is a profound comfort in realizing that you are not the one who has to hold the entire mountain at bay to keep your own heart intact. The world will keep turning whether or not you have solved every grievance in your mind tonight. The mountain does not ask for your permission to shift, and it certainly does not judge the depth of your exhaustion. Your heart beats and your lungs fill with air without you having to manage the process or seek a nod of justification from your own restless thoughts. There is a deep, quiet intelligence flowing through you, a rhythm that was here long before you started worrying about protecting yourself, and it will be here long after the current anxieties have passed. When we align ourselves with this rhythm, when we stop trying to dictate how the world perceives our path, we don't become less effective or less caring. We become more present. We become more capable of responding to what is actually happening, rather than what we are afraid might happen. You might be worried that if you stop trying to manage the debris of your life, you will lose your way or be swept away. But notice the difference between being prepared and being suffocated. When you live with honesty, you allow yourself to respond to the present without the filter of past anxiety. You provide support for the parts of yourself that are still scared. You observe the change in your own needs, but you do not cling to the boulders until you are too exhausted to see the stream. Caring for your life is an act of love and attention. Fighting against the flow of your life is an act of fear. What we are learning tonight is how to shift from fear-based bracing to love-based yielding. And that shift begins right here, in the quiet of this room, as you let the weight of your body sink deeper into the support of your bed. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be in the middle of a transition where you feel uncertain. You are allowed to not have the answers yet. You are not required to be a finished, perfectly unyielding structure. You are a person, a traveler who is still learning, still flowing, and there is immense beauty in the places where your defenses are beginning to soften. Because that is exactly where the possibility of your own relief begins. If you feel the pull to start managing your defenses again, to start tightening the walls of your own heart, simply observe that pull. Notice it without judgment. You don't have to scold yourself for having a mind that wants to feel invulnerable. That is just a habit it learned long ago to try to keep you safe. You can thank your mind for its vigilance, and then gently remind it that for tonight the work is paused. You can let the thoughts be there, like shadows on the wall, without having to follow them. They are not orders, they are not the truth. They are just thoughts, passing through the vast, clear sky of your awareness. In the next moment, we will look at how to bring this realization into your body, to help you soften that inner resistance that has been keeping you awake. We will move away from the effort of holding back the slide and move toward the ease of simply resting within the flow of the present. You are safe enough to let go. You have done enough for today. The world will hold itself for a few hours, and you, dear friend, have earned the right to drift in the quiet, undisturbed by the need to be anything other than exactly who you are, right here in this breath. If you are willing, let us move from the shadow of the mountain temple and the heavy silence of the rock slide into the sanctuary of your own body. Not to perform a task or achieve a state of perfection, but to engage in a gentle experiment in release. There is no need to change your posture, no need to sit, no need to perform any version of stillness. You are already exactly where you are meant to be. Let your breath become the only guide you follow. Do not force it to be deep or slow, just let it move at its own natural pace, like the rising and falling of a quiet tide against a sheltered shore. As you breathe, notice the physical sensation of the air moving past your lips, cool and light, and then, as you exhale, feel the way your chest sinks just a little bit closer to the comfort of the bedding beneath you. Imagine now that your mind is that temple courtyard Hideo spent so long guarding, and your thoughts are the jagged, heavy stones you have been obsessively raking, trying to keep the path clear for an audience that isn't watching. For so long, you have gripped the handle of your own internal struggle, terrified that if you stopped for even a moment, the natural decay of your circumstances would overrun the order you have worked so hard to maintain. But for these next few moments, we are going to set that heavy wooden rake down on the soft earth of the present. We are going to let the courtyard be whatever it is, and we are going to sit, just for a moment in the warmth of the day, unburdened by the need to hold back the mountain. If it feels right, bring to your awareness a single, recurring grievance or worry that has been asking for your attention tonight. It might be a resentment towards someone who let you down, a fear that you are falling behind in your responsibilities, or a persistent, nagging need to defend your own worth to an audience that isn't even there. You do not need to analyze it. You do not need to fix it or argue with it. Just let it appear in your mind's eye, like a smooth, heavy river stone sitting there in your open hands. Look at that stone. Notice the weight of it, the way you have spent so much energy trying to keep it from settling into the mud. The way you have worried about what might happen if you let the river of your life simply flow over it. You have been carrying this struggle for a long time, thinking that by keeping your grip tight, you were ensuring your safety against the chaos of change. But notice the tension in your fingers as you hold that imaginary stone. Notice how your arm, your shoulder, and even your neck have tightened in response to this small, simple struggle. You are not only carrying the weight of the worry, you are carrying the entire weight of your own fear that without the struggle you would be seen as vulnerable or weak. Now, imagine that you are sitting on the bank of that mossy, quiet stream and you reach down to place the stone into the water. You do not have to throw it away with force. You do not have to cast it into the deep, dark middle. Just let your fingers open. You do not have to release everything at once. Just let the tension go. When you release your grip, feel the instant change in your muscles. Feel the way your hand, finally free of the burden, begins to relax. The stone is still there, the person who hurt you, the regret you carry, the fear of being seen, but it is no longer being pulled taut by your hands. It is resting on the riverbed, but you are no longer holding it with such desperate, exhausting force. If your mind immediately reaches out to tighten its grip, if the habit of being the guardian is so strong that you find yourself reaching back for the stone, do not be hard on yourself. That is not a failure. That is just your mind's way of trying to protect you from the fear of being exposed to the flow. Acknowledge the reflex. Say to yourself with kindness, I see you trying to keep me safe by holding on so tight. And then, with the same gentle patience you would show a tired student, invite your hand to open once more. Let the stone settle. You are not abandoning your self-respect. You are simply allowing your body to exist without the need for you to be its constant, frantic protector. Notice what happens when you stop managing your defenses for an audience. Does the water rush in and overwhelm you? Does the mountain collapse? Or does the space around you simply become a little more honest, a little more human? You might find that the worry, no longer fed by your desperate need to carry it everywhere, begins to lose its sharp, demanding edge. It might start to look less like a necessary anchor and more like a testament to the fact that you have survived, that you have endured, and that you have held on when the winds were high. Perhaps you feel the urge to check the path, to make sure the courtyard looks raked and clean. You can let that urge come and go, like the wind moving through the valley. You don't have to follow the wind. You don't have to explain your process to the shadows. You can just remain here, in the space between the thoughts, where there is nothing to prove and nowhere else you need to be. If you find that your breathing has become shallow, simply invite a bit more room into your ribs. Let the exhale be long and slow, a way of signaling to your nervous system that you are safe enough to stop bracing for the gaze of others. You have spent so much energy being a guardian, and it is a tremendous release to finally remember what it feels like to just be a traveler sitting by the stream. The traveler does not try to impress the river. The traveler simply seeks a place to sit, and in seeking, finds their own capacity to be at rest. There may be parts of your life that feel cluttered, or heavy, or weary. That is the nature of a path that has actually traveled through the world. If you try to force it to be a clean, pristine space that never touches the debris of change, you will only end up exhausted, and you will never see the silver thread of water that is actually being carved through your own experience. But if you stop fighting the reality of your current, unobserved weariness, you might notice that there is a different kind of strength here, a deeper, more ancient intelligence that knows exactly how to move through the winter, with or without the approval of the world. You do not need to have a strategy for your peace tonight. You do not need to understand why the stone feels so heavy, or how you will eventually be strong again without the grip. Those answers will arrive in their own time, in their own way, and they will be far clearer if they come to you while you are rested, rather than while you are spiraling in a storm of defensiveness. For now, the only thing matters is the weight of your body against the mattress, the rhythm of your heart, and the quiet permission you are giving yourself to let the stone go. If a new thought arises, treat it like a gust of wind against the temple bell. You see it, you acknowledge the chime, and then you let the breath carry the sound away wherever it needs to go. You do not have to fight the wind. You do not have to gather the echoes into a pile for inspection. You can just let them be. This practice of observing without clutching is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows stronger with rest. You are not doing this to achieve some state of perfect invulnerability. You are doing this to become a better companion to your own experience. You are learning to sit by the stream, surrounded by the history of your journey, and finally, for the first time in a long time, you are finding that you can be at peace even when the path is obstructed, even when the debris has fallen, and even when you have no one to prove anything to. Take a few moments now to just feel the relief of this, the utter lack of demand. There is no one here asking you to be more than you are. There is no one here checking your courtyard for signs of imperfection. You are not a guardian who must stop the world from changing to be valuable. You are a person, and you are worthy of rest just because you exist. The mountain will sleep tonight, the stream will continue its song, the night will continue its cycle, and you can just breathe, you can just be. And if you find yourself drifting away into sleep, that is the best possible outcome. You do not need to stay awake to be wise. Your subconscious understands this wisdom even when your conscious mind is quiet. Let the words dissolve into the background. Let the practice settle into the marrow of your bones. You are doing exactly what you need to do. You are letting go, and in the letting go, you are finding the very safety you have been chasing for so long. If you feel your mind begin to pull back toward the rake, toward the need to be shielded, just feel the weight of your body again. Anchor yourself in the physical sensation of being here. The room is safe, the bed is warm, the night is quiet. You have already done enough for today. The rest can wait, the opinions can wait, The journey is yours, debris and all, and you are finally free to close your eyes. In the next moment, we will look at how even the most masterfully carved stone can be softened, not by force, but by the patient persistence of the very thing we are so afraid to embrace. But for now, drift. You are safe. In the high, desolate reaches of the northern mountains, where the stone is so hard it seems to drink the heat from the sun, lived a master stone-carver named Iwan. He was a man of legendary focus, possessing hands that could coax the most delicate, flowing lines out of the coarsest, most stubborn granite. For years, he had been obsessed with a single project: carving a life-sized statue of a seated figure that would represent the very essence of human endurance. He sought to capture the strength of the mountains themselves, unmoved, unbending, and eternal. He worked with iron chisels that he sharpened every morning until they could shave the hair from his arm, and he fought the stone with a fierce, unrelenting intensity. If the grain of the rock resisted his blade, he would strike harder, his jaw set in a permanent line of frustration, his entire body a monument to the belief that if he just possessed enough will, the world would eventually yield to his demands. He lived in a small, cramped cabin near the quarry, his space filled with broken chisels, piles of jagged rubble, and the suffocating dust of his own ambition. He did not talk to his neighbors, for he considered them soft, distracted by the trivialities of growing crops or tending to family. He had stripped his life down to the struggle, convinced that to be great he had to be as hard as the material he carved. Yet, for all his labor, the statue remained incomplete. Every time he attempted to refine the facial features, the rock would fracture in an unexpected way, or a hidden vein of quartz would ruin the symmetry he was chasing. He was a man who felt like his life was leaking away through the cracks in his work, and he blamed the stone for his failure. One particularly harsh spring, a week of freezing rain turned the mountain paths into treacherous slides of slick mud and loose shale. Ewan's hands were raw, swollen with arthritis from the cold, and he had broken his finest chisel on a particularly stubborn section of the chest. He flung the tool across the floor in a fit of rage, his breath coming in jagged, desperate gasps. He sat in the dark of his hut, surrounded by the dust and the broken fragments of his life, feeling that familiar, brittle sensation in his chest, the feeling that if he didn't finally master this stone, he would shatter into nothingness. He had become so invested in the outcome that he had lost the ability to feel the texture of his own life. Driven by a sudden, frantic need to escape the silence of his hut, he walked up toward the higher ridges, where the stream fed into a series of shallow, moss-filled pools. It was there he saw them, a group of children from the valley, who had climbed the trail despite the mud. They were not fighting the mountain, they were playing with it. They were taking soft, vibrant green moss and delicate willow leaves and placing them carefully into the deep, jagged crevices of a discarded boulder near the water. They were not trying to shape the rock to match an image in their minds. They were simply observing the natural contours of the stone and adding a touch of life to the places where the rock had already been broken. Ewan stood in the shadows of a cedar tree watching. One of the smallest children, a girl with mud on her face and eyes that held the quiet clarity of the stream, noticed a particularly deep crack in the boulder, a crack Ewan had once cursed for ruining a carving. She didn't try to chisel it smooth. She didn't try to force it into a shape. She simply tucked a handful of damp, velvety moss into the gap, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she sat back to watch how the water trickled over it, turning the rough, ugly fissure into a tiny, living garden. Ewan felt something shift inside his chest, a slow, painful, and deeply welcome loosening. For years he had been fighting the reality of the stone, demanding that it be what he imagined, refusing to listen to what the stone actually was. He had treated the fractures as personal failures, as evidence that he wasn't enough. But looking at the girl, He realized the rock wasn't resisting him. It was simply existing, and he was the one who had made it an enemy. He walked over to the boulder, his movements heavy and stiff, and sat down on the cold, wet ground near the children. The girl looked up at him and offered him a piece of moss. He hesitated, his hands trembling as he took the damp greenery. He looked at the crack, the very same crack he had spent 3 weeks trying to smooth out with force, and instead of reaching for a chisel, he just placed the moss inside. He felt the coolness against his skin, the softness of the plant, and the quiet, stubborn presence of the rock. He didn't have a sudden mystical revelation. He didn't become a master of wisdom overnight, but he did make one small, vital shift. He stopped trying to be the one who shaped the world. He became, for the first time in his life, a participant in it. He sat with the children until the light began to fade, his hands finally still in his lap. He didn't go back to his hut to sharpen his tools. He stayed by the stream, listening to the water and the wind, and for the first time in decades, he didn't feel the need to be hard to feel safe. He realized that the hardness of his armor, the discipline he wore, like a second skin, wasn't protecting his greatness. It was keeping him from feeling the world. He was still a carver, and he would still work with stone. But he knew now that the most resilient parts of his life were the ones he allowed to be soft, the ones he allowed to be marked by the passage of time, and the ones he allowed to be changed by the things he couldn't control. He returned to the quarry the next morning, but he didn't look at the statue with the eyes of a judge. He looked at it as if he were meeting an old, difficult friend. He picked up his chisel, but he worked differently. He worked with a light, rhythmic touch, listening for the sound the stone made under the blade. If the rock fractured, he didn't curse. He simply followed the new line, allowing the statue to become something he hadn't planned, something that was entirely and beautifully its own. He wasn't perfectly calm, and he still felt the old urge to force the stone into submission. But he found that by taking one slow, deliberate breath before every strike, he could stay in the stream of the work, rather than getting stuck in the eddy of his own frustration. In a moment, we will look at how this small, quiet transformation, this movement from the rigid requirement of control to the fluid power of participation, is the key to unlocking the brittleness that keeps your own mind so tired. We will see why the very effort you use to hold your life in place is the only thing preventing you from finding a rest that is deep, genuine, and entirely your own. But for now, simply notice the sensation of your own chest as you breathe. Notice if you are holding your breath, bracing against the night, or if, just for a moment, you can allow your shoulders to drop an inch, letting the weight of your own ironclad defenses rest exactly where it is, without having to carry it for another step. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to be unarmored, just for the night. When we move through the world with the belief that we must remain unyielding, we are often operating on a secret, deeply held conviction that our suffering is a necessary price we must pay to ensure we are never caught off guard again. We treat our memories of hurt or our anxieties about the future not as stories of where we have been or what we anticipate, but as defensive manuals for how to survive. We believe that if we can just keep our minds tightly focused on potential threats, if we can anticipate every possible outcome, or if we can maintain a constant, rigid guard against being too soft, we will somehow achieve a state of permanent safety. Yet, this mechanism of control, this desperate attempt to master the flow of our own lives, is the very thing that turns the vibrant, unpredictable river of existence into a source of constant, brittle exhaustion. We are so busy bracing ourselves against the current that we have forgotten how to float. This behavior, born from a place of protective instinct, becomes the primary source of our inner turbulence. We have begun to turn our protective instincts into our entire identity. We define ourselves by the ways we have had to be tough, by the moments where we felt we had to harden up to survive a disappointment, or by the ways we push ourselves to meet impossible standards just to feel worthy of a moment's rest. We hold these defensive postures up as if they were symbols of our competence. But in doing so, we have forgotten that the wall we build to keep the pain out is the same wall that keeps the peace from entering. By constantly reopening the narrative of our own struggles, by replaying the moments where we felt vulnerable in the theater of the mind, we are not protecting ourselves, we are living in a state of perpetual bracing, tethering our nervous systems to a past that no longer exists in physical form, but thrives in our resistance to letting it flow by. Buddhist wisdom offers a mirror to this process. It suggests that there is a fundamental distinction between the first pain, the original hurt, the natural consequence of being human in a world that is always changing, and the second pain, which is the layer of judgment, resistance and narrative we wrap around that hurt. The first pain is the rain that falls upon the landscape. It is simply a reality of the weather, a touch of cool or cold that is part of the environment. The second pain is the mind's insistence that the rain should not be falling, and its subsequent attempt to build a wall of stone to hide from the sky. We cannot always stop the first pain. Life will bring moments of betrayal, disappointment, and loss. But we can learn to stop feeding the second pain. We can learn to stop building the wall. When you judge yourself for feeling soft, for needing rest, or for finding the world overwhelming, you are feeding the second pain. When you replay a mistake to punish yourself, or when you obsessively rehearse the future to prevent any possibility of embarrassment, you are feeding the second pain. When you use your history as a way to prove that you are not capable, or that you must stay permanently on guard, you are feeding the second pain. This is not a judgment on your character. It is simply a description of what happens when the mind tries to solve an emotional problem with a defensive strategy. Your mind is trying to keep you safe, but it is using a map of a battlefield to navigate a landscape that has shifted into a forest. You are no longer that person who was hurt in the storm. You are the one who has survived the storm and is now standing by the stream, even if you are still wearing the heavy, iron armor of the guardian who first arrived. It takes a great deal of quiet, steady observation to realize that not every thought is a command. When your mind brings up a memory of past difficulty or a worry about whether you are doing enough, it is offering you a choice. It is saying, remember this, so you can be prepared, but you have the capacity to pause, to breathe, and to see the thought for what it is, a ghost of an old protection. You can acknowledge the instinct to be defensive, thank it for its service during your hardest years, and then consciously choose not to follow the narrative down the dark, spiraling path of overthinking. Peace is not the absence of these thoughts. Peace is the presence of a different relationship with them. It is the ability to hear the warning chime of the mind without having to run for the door. It is the ability to see the shadow of the past without having to become the shadow. Consider how much of your life you spend trying to fix your present self through the lens of shame, believing that if you were just a little more disciplined or a little more detached, you would finally be untouchable. This is the ultimate paradox of the armor. We wear it to be untouchable, but it also makes us unreachable. It prevents us from feeling the actual cooling relief of the stream we have managed to reach. We want to be loved, we want to be secure, and we want to belong. Yet we keep our walls buckled tight, terrified that if we were to loosen even one stone, we would be seen as we are human, fallible, and still learning. But being seen as human is the only way to be loved. The armor doesn't invite connection, it invites distance. There is a profound, quiet strength in sitting with uncertainty. It is the strength of the master carver who finally understood that his beauty was not in his ability to control the stone, but in his willingness to follow the grain. He knew that his safety was not in his ability to force the world into a shape of his choosing, but in his ability to remain present and responsive, regardless of whether the rock fractured or flowed. When you stop treating every uncomfortable emotion as a signal that you are failing, you stop the drain on your energy. You stop trying to resolve the unsolvable, and instead, you begin to inhabit the space where you are. You begin to understand that you are not the debris in the river, you are the one who stands on the bank, observing the movement with an open, unhurried heart. This integration of wisdom into your daily life means learning to notice when the mind is reaching for the tools of resistance, without turning that noticing into a new reason to dislike yourself. If you find your mind replaying an old regret, or if you feel the familiar surge of pressure to perform, you can observe it. You can see the mechanism of your mind at work, trying to shield you from the perceived threat of being soft. And then you can gently offer yourself the same compassion you would offer a friend. You don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to have solved your relationship with the past by sunrise. You just have to be a little more curious, a little less reactive, and a little more willing to trust that the stream is real, even if you haven't yet taken off the last of the armor. You have spent so much energy trying to justify your pain, trying to weave it into a story that makes sense, trying to turn it into an identity that keeps you safe. But tonight, you are invited to set that story down. You are invited to see that the worry is just a memory, and you are the vast, open space in which that memory is appearing. You are far larger than your history. You are far deeper than your defenses. You are the one who is witnessing the need for protection, and in that witnessing, you are already beginning to break the cycle. As the night deepens, let the focus of your mind drift away from the analysis and into the physical reality of the quiet room. You are not required to be a scholar of your own suffering. You are not required to provide a final, definitive answer to the question of why we're hurt. You are only required to be here, breathing, resting, and letting the layers of the past settle. The world is moving on its own. The night is doing its work. The stars, the trees, the rivers, they all continue without your constant monitoring. You can let them. You can trust that the earth will hold you while you finally, after so much effort, allow yourself to stop being the one who must hold everything together. The wall is not the way home. The surrender of the wall is the way home. Feel the air, feel the weight of your own existence, and know that you are finally, quietly, safe to let the struggle dissolve into the calm, empty space of the night. It is one thing to find this stillness here, in the sanctuary of your room, under the heavy comfort of a blanket, where the world is quiet and the light is soft. It is quite another thing to carry this wisdom into the noise of your Tuesday afternoon, or the frantic pulse of a Sunday evening, when the weight of the coming week begins to gather like storm clouds in the distance. You might wonder how a lesson about mountain hermits, iron armor, and heavy, mud-caked cloaks applies to the ping of a notification, the tightness in your chest when you feel behind in your work, or the quiet, persistent ache of comparing your own weary life to the polished surfaces of everyone else's existence. But this is exactly where the practice lives. Peace is not meant to be a destination you visit for a few hours in the dark. It is a way of walking through the day. Think of the small, almost invisible moments when you feel that heavy, imaginary strap of your armor tightening across your chest, begging you to brace yourself against the world so that you won't be caught off guard. Perhaps it is when you send a message to someone you care about, and the minutes tick by without a reply. You can feel the mind start to spiral, can't you? You start to invent stories about why they haven't answered, or you begin to rehearse what you might say if they don't, or you feel the sharp, familiar sting of rejection before anything has even happened. In that moment, you are reaching for the brass buckle, your hand instinctively tightening to make sure your armor is secure. What would happen if, instead of following that story, you simply noticed the sensation of the grip? You don't have to ignore the fact that you feel anxious. You don't have to pretend you don't care. You can acknowledge the feeling, I am feeling a bit uncertain right now, and that is okay. And then you can breathe. A single conscious breath before you reach for your phone to check again, before you decide to send another message, before you start the cycle of self-criticism. That breath is not just air, it is a moment of space. It is the practice of loosening the clasp. You are choosing to be the traveler who trusts his ability to walk through the storm rather than the prisoner of his own gear. You are choosing to let the moment be what it is, rather than forcing it to look secure to satisfy a fear that isn't truly happening. Or consider the nights when you lie awake, the room dark, the silence heavy, and your mind begins to play back a mistake from years ago. You are trying to scrub that memory clean, trying to say the right words to a person who is no longer there, trying to fix a rusted buckle in your history that has already been pulled tight by the passage of time. You are exhausted by this labor, yet you feel that if you stop, you are somehow betraying the lessons you should have learned. But you are not being productive. You are being a prisoner to an armor that was forged in a winter long since past. What if you allowed yourself to see that the mistake was just a part of the journey, a place where the strap slipped and you had to find a new way to move, and that you are allowed to stop trying to hide that scar from yourself? You do not need to be the person you were when you made that error. You have grown and you have changed. You are allowed to forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now. Forgiveness is not a grand, singular event. It is the quiet, repeated act of letting go of the buckle you are using to poke at your own history. Every time you notice the memory and choose not to follow it into the maze of resentment, you are practicing the wisdom of the mountain hermit. You are accepting that the journey is what it is, and you are no longer obligated to repeat the same struggle. And what of the times when you are exhausted, yet you feel guilty for resting? We live in a culture that treats productivity as a form of moral goodness, and for many of us, the idea of doing nothing feels like a failure of character. We smile through the day, performing the role of the capable, collected, and thriving person, while inside we are flickering like a candle in a windstorm. We are afraid that if we stop the performance, if we drop the mask, we will be seen as empty or weak. But remember Kenji. His strength was not in his ability to wear iron links that kept him from the river. It was in his willingness to accept that he could stand in the mud without needing to be dry. Your worth is not tied to your output. You do not need to earn your right to breathe, to exist, or to rest. When you feel that guilt rising, look at it with the same curiosity you would bring to a stranger sitting on a park bench. Oh, there is that old story again. The one that says, I am not enough unless I am wearing my armor. You don't have to believe the story. You don't have to argue with it. You can just let it sit there like a shadow, while you give yourself the permission to be still. Resting is not a reward for a hard day's work. It is a fundamental need of a human being. It is the way you nourish the soil of your own life, so that whatever is meant to grow can find its own time to bloom. This is the beauty of the middle way. You can care about your relationships, your work, and your dreams without gripping them until they suffocate. You can be disciplined without being a tyrant to yourself. You can set goals without making your happiness dependent on their achievement. When you begin to move through the day with this awareness, something subtle shifts. The world doesn't necessarily get easier, but you get steadier. You find that you have a bit more room to breathe in the middle of a conflict, a bit more patience when things go wrong, a bit more grace when you inevitably stumble. You might be worried that if you become this soft, you will lose your edge, or you will be walked over, or you will lose your drive. But notice the people who truly embody this kind of peace. They are not passive, they are responsive. They are not weak, they are resilient. because they are not wasting their energy fighting their own inner experience. They have so much more to give to the world. When they face a challenge, they don't add the second wound of self-judgment. They meet the situation clearly, they take the next right step, and they move on. This is the path of the high mountain hermitage, the way of the mountain traveler, and the secret of the broken golden pottery. It is the art of being fully present, fully human, and fully at peace with the reality of your life, even especially when it feels like a heavy, frozen winter. You are doing the work simply by noticing when you are reaching for the brass buckle, and by choosing, with infinite gentleness, to let your hand fall away. You are becoming the traveler who appreciates the warmth of the fire, rather than the soldier who is terrified of the cold. And as you continue to practice this in the small, seemingly insignificant moments of your day, you will find that the peace you were looking for was never a prize to be won. It was the space you were always inhabiting, just waiting for you to realize you were already home. In a little while, we will let all of this dissolve completely. We will set down the metaphors and the stories and the teachings, and we will allow the mind to simply rest in the vast, quiet space that remains. There is nothing left for you to manage. The gear is on the ground, the straps are loose, and you, dear friend, are finally ready to drift into the deep, restorative dark. The iron chisel is resting now, set down upon the earth, and the granite that you spent your days fighting has finally ceased to be an opponent. The heavy, abrasive dust of your striving has settled, coating the floor of your cabin in a thin, pale layer of silence. The statue you were trying to force into existence, the one that had to be perfect, the one that had to be unyielding, has dissolved back into the mystery of the stone. You are no longer the carver who demands that the world match the image in your mind. You are simply a person breathing in the cool, night air, feeling the quiet miracle of a chest that rises and falls without a single command from your will. The hardness you wore like armor has lost its edge. It has been weathered, worn down by the rain, and polished by the same stream that runs through the valley, leaving you soft, porous, and entirely open to the dark. The room is very still now. The flickering lantern has long since burned out, and the only light comes from the pale silver glow of the moon, filtering through the pine needles outside. The shadows in the corners are no longer threatening, they are just shadows. Spaces where the light has chosen not to reach, and they hold the peace of a deep, ancient sleep. Your breath is no longer a tool for discipline, it is a gentle, rhythmic hum that connects you to the earth beneath your bed. Feel your legs becoming heavy, the muscles finally relinquishing their grip on the day. Your arms are resting, no longer needing to hold, no longer needing to strike. Your hands are open, palms turned toward the sky, empty of the tools of control, and full of the quiet grace of surrender. The teaching has settled into the marrow of your bones, deeper than thought, deeper than memory. It is not something you need to carry or remember. It is like the moss in the riverbed, growing in the places where you were once broken, turning the jagged edges of your life into something that can hold moisture, something that can breathe, something that can finally foster life. You have let go of the need to be the rock that defies the water. You have let go of the need to be the mountain that defies the wind. You have stepped into the flow, and the flow is taking you exactly where you need to be, into the soft, impenetrable safety of sleep. There is nothing left to solve tonight. The debris from the rock slide is not your responsibility. The shape of the stone is not your responsibility. The passage of time is not your responsibility. You have spent so much of your life trying to manage the mountains, trying to keep the path clear, trying to hold the world together with the force of your own will. But look at how beautifully the world holds itself without your help. The forest grows, the water moves, the moon orbits, and the stars continue their silent, brilliant dance. You are a part of that dance, not its director. You can stop raking now. You can stop carving. You can simply let yourself be held by the vast, unnameable peace that exists when you are finally done, trying to be anything other than a person in need of rest. Feel your head sinking into the pillow, the weight of it disappearing into the soft fibers. Your eyelids are becoming heavy, a natural, welcome gravity pulling them closed. The thoughts that once raced through your mind are now like clouds drifting over a mountain peak, moving, dissolving, and leaving behind a sky that is clear, vast, and silent. You are not losing yourself in this sleep. You are returning to the source of yourself. You are returning to the part of you that was never brittle, never defensive, and never afraid of the current. That part of you is already asleep. That part of you is already at peace. All you have to do is follow it, drifting further away from the banks of the day, into the wide, quiet center of the stream. The darkness is not empty. It is full of the same life that moves the river and grows the moss. It is full of the same silence that sat with Hideo in the courtyard and watched the children by the pool. You are safe to let go of the shore. You are safe to let go of the oars. The current is kind. The night is a cradle, and you are finally allowed to be small, to be soft, and to be entirely at rest. Every breath draws you deeper, down past the surface noise, down into the cool, dark, and perfectly silent water of your own true nature. There is no more carving to do. There is no more stone to fight. There is only the rhythm of the universe, moving through you, around you, and as you... What if the strength you were chasing was never found in the rock that stands against the flood, but in the water that finds its way home?